Welcome to the Skills webinar on strategies for increasing social success in the classroom for individuals with high-functioning autism and Asperger's. I'm Dr. Kim Lucker-Greene with Behavioral Solutions Consulting Incorporated, and I've been invited to do this skills presentation today. I thank you all for joining me. I just wanted to let you know that time permitting, I will field questions at the end. If we don't have time, then you can go ahead and email any questions that you have to info@skillsglobal.com. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing the following: the challenges of being socially skilled and socially competent. We'll identify some of the important areas of need for social competence and some of the specific skill sets needed for kids to be socially successful in schools as well as community settings. I'll outline the components of effective social skills programs as identified in the research literature, and I'll discuss some of the most successful approaches for training these skills, and also some effective intervention strategies and methods for teaching some of the most relevant skills. So let's first take a brief moment to consider some important questions related to today's topic. First of all, why do some kids lack social skills needed to successfully interact with others? And secondly, why do some kids fail to display appropriate social behaviors even after receiving specialized instruction in social skill development? And when you think of an individual you know that lacks social skills, what skills in particular would you like to see him or her display? So let's think about that for a moment. Let's go ahead and talk about what it means to be socially skilled. Socially skilled is the ability to respond to social activities or environments in a manner that produces, maintains, and enhances positive interpersonal effects. This involves the use of specific strategies used to perform a social task, such as concentrating on what a person is saying and remembering the relevant details in order to respond appropriately. We're talking about a composite of skills related to interacting with those around you. These skills will allow one to behave in a manner that can be judged socially competent. So let's talk about social competence. One social competence involves a multitude of desires and abilities that result in what somebody would consider a person being socially skilled. Social competence should be differentiated from adaptive behavior. It can only be understood within the context of both demands of specific situations and expectations of performance within them. It involves an evaluative judgment made by important social agents in an individual's environment. So in the school setting, it would be individuals such as teachers, parents, classmates, coaches, etc. They establish the expectations for social competence and standards for its evaluation. And as we all know, expectations in the school environment can vary widely across different social situations. For example, a one-on-one private conversation has very different expectations than talking to peers at the lunch table. Interactions in the library or classroom setting require very different actions than those out at recess or during PE. Responses to a peer, per se, that just received an award would be different than responding to a peer that just got reprimanded by the teacher. So those are just some examples of specific situations. Now let's look at the relationship between social skills and social competence. Social skills are what allow an individual to achieve valuable social outcomes, such as these: friendship, peer popularity, teacher or supervisor acceptance. Social skill deficits, when identified, need to be remediated. Remember, we're talking here about really, truly fitting in and being accepted by those in the school or in community settings. So when important social outcomes are not being achieved, that's when social skill deficits must be identified and remediated. Then these newly taught skills can be applied within specific settings to improve the overall social competence levels of the students. So in thinking about all of this, let's think about what makes you so socially competent. Let me ask you, are you really socially competent? Are there areas in which you may not be socially competent? Maybe. There's probably situations that we all can think of where we may have not felt like we were socially competent. We've probably all experienced a social situation or two in our lives where we felt a little bit awkward in social situations, a little out of our element. But overall, most of us would probably describe ourselves as socially competent people. And what is it that makes us competent? So some of those things involve the fact that we are motivated to learn appropriate actions, and we're able to perceive social situations accurately so that we can in turn respond accurately. We can identify the skills that we need to use in individual social situations, and then we have the skills that enable us to adequately perform the responses that we need. We're sensitive to social feedback, some of us, and we can adjust behaviors to fit situational requirements. And we're also willing and able to emulate the behaviors of others, and we understand the importance and the need to be able to do so. So I'm going to quickly kind of go through these next couple of slides that talk about the reasons for the lack of social skills. Most of us are pretty familiar, if we're working with individuals on the autism spectrum, with the things that I'm going to discuss. All right, related to visual spatial processing, children with autism spectrum disorder tend to rely on language as their primary source of information. They're often less tuned in to the visual information and able to process it effectively, so they don't naturally watch others to learn. Holistic processing is where individuals tend to notice the details but tend to miss the big picture. So it's the problem of over-selectivity that we're familiar with. Our students tend to have significant issues with holistic processing, which hinders their abilities to respond effectively in social situations and learn social skills through natural daily experiences. Deficits in these areas make it difficult for effective social learning to occur in a natural way. And then there's specific challenges with inferring the intentions of other people. This can lead to inappropriately harsh or defensive reactions to social situations and can oftentimes leave these individuals vulnerable to being manipulated by more savvy peers. And we've all seen the situation where an individual is being teased by their peers and they're completely unaware that they're being teased or made fun of. Some additional reasons for lack of social skills involve abstract reasoning and problem solving. A lot of the individuals on the spectrum have a difficult time with being able to understand and solve problems. They have difficulty recognizing what their options are in social situations and making an appropriate choice. So this results in them kind of getting stuck or locked onto an ineffective behavior, or becoming frustrated and melting down. Also, processing speed is an issue here and is a difference that individuals with ASD have related to the typical learner. Even though individuals with high-functioning autism and Asperger's can have very strong language skills, they can often be overwhelmed very easily by a rapid flow of information that comes at them in a social situation. Emotional vulnerability comes into play also in the deficits that we see related to social skills. The world can seem very chaotic and overwhelming oftentimes, and efforts to connect with peers can be awkward, unsuccessful, and even painful. And so we see oftentimes that individuals in this position have difficulty recognizing their own emotional states, being able to control their emotional states, and effectively coping, having the coping skills to help them deal with strong emotions. So these students are aware of being different and not fitting in, oftentimes, and this can lead to depression and other emotional problems if not addressed early. All right, so let's take a look at probably one of my favorite slides here. This slide illustrates the vast number of skills needed to truly succeed in a social world. And as you can see, there are many. And wow, I mean, this is a tremendous number of skills across a wide variety of skill areas and domains. There's cognitive skills that involve analytic thinking and conceptual thinking, motivation so that individuals will persist in learning situations that are difficult for them, communication skills involving concentration, attention, both verbal and nonverbal skills, self-awareness, being able to manage and control feelings, showing empathy for others. So as this slide illustrates, there's a tremendous number of skills that are necessary for a person to be socially competent, and it's extremely complex. So we have to ask ourselves, where do we begin with our kids? And all of these component skills interact with one another in various ways to be able to allow us to appropriately respond across a wide variety of social situations that we encounter. And let's be honest, some of us, in looking at this, are still working on a few of these skills ourselves, right? So imagine having the deficits associated with autism and Asperger's to deal with. This is some tough stuff that we're talking about. And I think this illustration really puts things in perspective and lets us know what we're really dealing with. So, where do we turn for help in trying to address this vast array of issues that need to be dealt with? What I'm going to do, just for the purpose of today's webinar, I'm going to focus primarily on a meta-analysis that was done by Bellini and colleagues, in which they looked at 55 single-subject design studies and examined the effectiveness of school-based social skills interventions for children and adolescents with ASD. It should be mentioned that intervention, maintenance, and generalization effects were measured by computing the percentage of non-overlapping data points in the studies. So the results of this analysis suggest that social skills interventions have only been minimally effective for children with ASD. Ouch, not what we're hoping to find, right? But it's important also to understand that assessing effectiveness of social skills training is challenging because the social skills that were targeted, their definitions, the training methods used, and the measures of progress can differ greatly across studies. So, although we saw only minimal effects from social skills training programs, there was some good information obtained from the analysis. The findings of the meta-analysis identified some specific problems with the interventions that were used to train social skills. Knowing this information can help us design more effective treatments. So let's take a look. So the findings identified some of the following problems. The interventions weren't matched to the children's needs. Well, we know that if the interventions don't match the needs, we wouldn't necessarily expect that they're going to be effective in addressing those needs. The lack of generalization of skills was seen into the natural settings, which was a problem, again, of how a lot of the social skills training is done, because it's not done oftentimes in the natural settings. The short duration of treatment was a problem. There was a failure to motivate skill performance, and they found that it was most effective for middle and high school students, and then the lowest maintenance was in the preschool-aged children. And then interventions that were delivered in the classroom, of course in the natural environment, as we would expect, had stronger effects than the pull-out programs. But don't despair. Many ABA strategies have shown to be effective in teaching a variety of social skills. So some examples, of course, include what we know to be effective: modeling, prompting, and reinforcement, teaching things such as eye contact, appropriate content in conversation, initiation of conversation, appropriate play skills, and also increasing the frequency and duration of interactions have all been shown to be effective using modeling, prompting, and reinforcement interventions. And there's more. There continues to be increasing support for some of the following things. Video modeling, which has really shown in the last 5 to 10 years a huge increase in the research literature. Social stories, which is now an emerging treatment for teaching some social skills. Social thinking, which we'll talk about some of these in a little more detail later, which is the work of Michelle Garcia Winner. And structured learning is another approach that has shown to have some good results. So the outcome research has identified some critical components of skills training. So let's look at some of these key components of effective social skills training. The first one is assessment, right? So assessment allows you to prioritize relevant skills based on input from key stakeholders. Of course, as we talked about before, the parents, teachers, peers, and coaches and other people that the students would interact with, right? And allows you to take a more functional approach at addressing those specific behavioral deficits, and also looking at interfering behaviors, behavior excesses as well, right? And one of the things that I wanted to discuss here was the social skills solution, which is a manual for teaching social skills to children with autism. What I like about this checklist, it includes 10 modules and 3 different levels. I have a slide here that gives you just a little picture, a little sample of what that looks like. And the checklist is a very nice comprehensive layout of specific skills across relevant areas, such as joint attention, greetings, social play, self-calming, conversations, perspective taking, problem solving, friendships, and things in the home and the community. So it's a very useful tool for choosing and tracking individual social skills goals. So let's take a look at some other commonly used instruments. Some others that you may or may not be familiar with: the social skills rating system, the social responsiveness scale, the SCQ, which is the social communication questionnaire, and the autism social skills profile in Scott Bellini's book, as well as the social skills checklist. So while these may be helpful in identifying some general deficits in children, they may not provide enough specific guidance necessarily for meeting the most vital needs of a child to progress socially. It'll be important to conduct some in vivo observations to really thoroughly assess what a student needs in their individual school settings. So this first step of assessment is really key to developing effective social skills interventions for your students. Second is motivation. We all know the importance of motivation and understand that this is really key to successfully teaching appropriate social interactions. And in the absence of motivation, many of these responses are developed in a rote, unnatural way. And these social interactions will then appear awkward in many cases. What I have here on this slide is just looking at the different intrinsic and extrinsic reward needs of individuals, either with pre-symbolic or good symbolic language. The individuals that we're talking about with high-functioning autism and Asperger's are going to probably have good symbolic language and be able to work for some of the following extrinsic and intrinsic rewards that are displayed on this slide. Okay, the third component is initial skill acquisition. This involves teaching skills using strategies that match the student's language, cognition, and attention abilities. These are students that we're talking about that have stronger language skills and higher intellectual and cognitive abilities. So this is where you would incorporate programs that address executive functioning, such as organizing, executive functioning, and theory of mind skills. Executive functioning would include skills such as organizing, planning, sustaining attention, and inhibiting inappropriate responses. And then theory of mind refers to one's ability to perceive how others think and feel and how they relate to oneself. Both of these issues can impact the behavior of individuals with Asperger's and high-functioning autism when it involves engagement with others. Cognitive behavioral strategies can be very effective for these individuals. These students can learn to reconceptualize social interactions and become better able to more accurately read, quote unquote, the behavior of others. Once they understand others' motives and the rationale for the code of conduct that exist in various social situations, they can more easily monitor their own behavior and adjust their responses to other people and situations. The fourth component is generalization. And this involves making sure that we're programming for generalization whenever we're teaching social skills in the school setting. This is where you want to make sure that you're taking the teaching across many different real-world school settings and with a variety of different peers, remembering that the social norms and expectations will be different across these various environments, and you need to prepare your students for all of these environments and help them identify the differences and the salient cues to respond to in these individual environments. Visual support such as power cards that provide simple rules for social engagement, such as making eye contact, using proper body orientation, facing the listener, and staying on topic, are also good tools that individuals can use in the school setting that can provide support without having an individual stand out or look too awkward in any social situation. Parent involvement, of course, is important. You want to make sure that the parents always know what skills you are teaching so they can expose their children to the opportunities to practice these and train parents how to prompt and reinforce their children for these appropriate responses. Peer sensitivity training is the final component. Training of typical peers should be a part of any social skills intervention in the school setting, helping peers understand the differences of individuals with Asperger's so that they can be comfortable interacting and persisting to get an individual to respond in social situations. You may select, in dealing with training peers, you may select some specific peer buddies, but it would be more effective if all classroom peers are involved in the training for the ASD student. That's not always possible in a lot of school settings, and sometimes it may be most beneficial to just start with a few select peers that seem to maybe have compassion or have bonded with the individual with Asperger's or high-functioning autism. So now you're asking yourself, okay, how do I help my ASD student succeed at school? Let's take a look at 5 specific areas that need to be addressed. And these involve communication skills, social interaction, sensory needs, behavioral issues, and academic skills. So related to communication skills, the problems that you're going to see might look like some of the following. An individual student might have difficulty asking for help or understanding a task. They may seem easily confused by complex directions. Talking at the same time as others may be another issue. Making statements that seem out of the blue, off topic, or just odd. Saying things that seem disrespectful, inappropriate, or argumentative. And taking statements very literally and responding inappropriately. So these are some of the social behaviors that you may see related to communication deficits of the individuals that we're talking about. So what can you do to address these? Breaking complex skills down into smaller pieces and repeating instructions, being careful about rephrasing, because remember, students have processing issues. So make sure you're careful about that. Of course, saying things in a very clear, precise, stated manner. Explaining sarcasm, metaphors, and idioms and words with double meanings. Helping the student find a phrase or signal for when he or she does not understand directions. So they just have a covert way of letting the teacher know that they need a little more support. And teaching ways to express their thoughts without offending others. So those are just some ways to address the common communication deficits that you see related to social engagement. All right, related to social interaction specifically, you may see some of the following: an inability to read facial cues or body language, unable to pick up on verbal and nonverbal social cues, difficulty making small talk or conversation and staying on topic. They may have trouble understanding emotions of themselves and others and misread social stimuli, and that often results in overreacting to situations. And also wanting to talk about the same topic repeatedly. I know that's one of the things that I think makes it very challenging for individuals to engage with others because they're so hyper-focused oftentimes on their limited interests. So some things you can do to address the social interaction deficits are protecting the student, of course, from being bullied or teased by their peers, Finding a peer mentor or a peer buddy that you can pair them up with in the classroom and around campus. Knowing the difference when a person's being isolated by choice and when they're isolated because the peers won't include them. It's very, very important that teachers and school staff really do make sure that they're observing and knowing whether or not it's because an individual's choosing to be isolated or it's because they're being excluded by their peers. Being able to help classmates understand how to respond to individuals on the spectrum. Helping them understand the use of humor is also something that's very important. Training self-preservation and conflict resolution skills and training them to look to peers to learn how to act. Being able to understand, like we had talked about in a previous slide, is that it's not common for them to look to others to know how to act and how to respond. And so we have to teach them to be able to know that if I want to get information about how I should behave in a certain social situation, I can look to my peers and learn from them. That's called observational learning. And that's something that has to be taught to these individuals. All right, when it comes to sensory needs, we may see some of the following. Of course, increased sensitivity to different stimuli. Right, sensitivities can make an individual more anxious or stressed, which again can lead to overreacting to various stimuli. Difficulty with staying focused, needing to be able to move around and seeking additional sensory input can be very disruptive sometimes in social situations, and the need to deal with the sensitivity quickly because they can get overwhelmed and overreact. So what should you do? Of course, you want to help them be able to predict environmental changes and make them aware to reduce anxiety and give them a chance to prepare and adjust. Provide a personal quiet space if they need to relax or collect their thoughts. Allowing the student to have a self-calming item can also be very helpful in those situations. And of course, teaching discrimination of where and when certain behaviors can be done and why this is important. Related to behavioral issues, I'm sure we've all become pretty familiar with some of the behavioral issues that we'll see with these individuals. You'll see, of course, egocentric and selfish actions, sometimes easily annoyed or agitated, tendency to state exactly what's on their mind without any filter, sometimes mood swings, explosive behavior, both verbally and physically. We see a lot of these individuals tend to be perfectionists, and things need to be just a certain way, and sometimes they can't move on if things aren't just perfect, and that can interfere significantly in social situations. Okay, and oftentimes they get stuck thinking about a problem or a special interest and have difficulty switching gears without significant support. So things that we want to do is involve teaching self-awareness, self-monitoring, and self-regulation. This is very important. Identifying triggers, helping them identify and being able to monitor their responses. The zones of regulation is a cognitive behavioral treatment approach that many of you may be familiar with that is very effective with individuals with ASD. Teaching the student replacement behaviors, of course, when they're feeling frustrated, angry, or anxious. Being able to train them so that they can wait and gain attention appropriately. So there's, again, modeling acceptance of the student for peers, making sure that you don't take the student's comments personally. Again, this is going to take a lot of training to be able to get them to be able to understand that. And that's some of the work of Michelle Garcia-Winter. Being consistent and clear in your expectations and consequences for both appropriate and inappropriate behavior. All right, academic skills. They may be strong in concrete subjects such as math and science. Weak in abstract areas is common. Unable to find the main idea, not be able to discriminate what's relevant in academic lessons. Avoiding certain subject that they may be uncomfortable with, or overstimulated during lengthy activities. Some of the things you can do, of course, be calm, matter of fact, and predictable. Giving materials and directions orally as well as visually, providing additional intensive instruction and using concrete examples during your teaching. You always want to use predictable classroom routines, rules, and expectations, and also setting up opportunities for them to learn how to deal with things that change. So while you want to have predictable classroom routines, you don't want it to always be predictable. You also want to train that things can be variable as well. Providing frequent and positive feedback, and if necessary, breaking skills down so that an individual can learn in smaller chunks so they will not be so overwhelmed. So making the modifications and accommodations that are necessary for things that involve fine motor, also oftentimes necessary for individuals with ASD. All right, so let's look at some of the approaches for teaching these necessary social skills. In social stories, which many of you may be familiar with Carol Gray, the hidden curriculum is also something that is commonly used. You may see that with, and that involves directly teaching the unspoken social rules. So we're going to kind of go through these quickly for the sake of time. Technological interventions, which have become much more common now with the iPad generation. You've got an iPad, iTouch, iSomething, and YouTube videos. So there's a lot of really good software out there, a lot of good applications that allow individuals to be successful in developing social skills in a more contrived setting and then be able to generalize those into more natural environments. So social thinking was developed by Michelle Garcia Winter. And one thing, this is a cognitive behavioral approach that involves not just teaching an individual how to do it, but teaching them the why. So this really involves social thinking vocabulary. So it takes abstract social terms and makes them concrete. And what we're talking about here is getting an individual to be able to think about socializing. So they don't just have a rote set of skills, but that they understand and can think about what's happening across a wide variety of different social situations and learn how to respond appropriately in those different situations. Not just because they've learned some rote response, but they've learned how to think socially to be able to respond more effectively. The work of Tom Kowalski on teaching to be in the zone is also something that I found to be very effective. And that really goes along with the social thinking. It's more of a cognitive approach. It involves really developing appropriate stimulus control over social behavior so that the social responses can come under control of specific antecedent stimuli. So it really has to do with discrimination training. And being in the zone is a term that's used to describe what most people would expect to see in a given situation. So it's based on the idea that for any situation, a set of expectations has already been decided upon by a majority of individuals. So if you're walking around with your zipper down, for example, you are out of the zone. We need to make individuals with Asperger's aware of how they are seen by others so that they have this awareness and they know when they're in the zone and when they're not in the zone. Some specific interventions for teaching the necessary social skills that we've been talking about might involve facilitated social group opportunities. So these can be done in the school, facilitated by teachers, paraprofessionals, or other school support staff. The social lunch bunch or social lunch club is a nice way to allow an individual on the spectrum that needs support in developing social skills to be able to do so in a smaller and a less structured environment where they can develop these skills where it's a little less intimidating and may create a little less anxiety for them. It's usually provided with training on how to set up the interactions and prompt responses in a natural way. When you set up these kinds of lunch groups, you might want to be prepared to set up reinforcement systems, not just for the individual that's receiving the training, but also for the peers. So ideally what we would want is for the social interactions themselves to be naturally reinforcing to all the individuals. But depending on the situation, you may initially need to use some contrived reinforcers in these situations. Summer camp programs for typical kids that allow therapists to come in and train their camp staff, or be able to allow therapists to come and do some shadowing or monitoring of the ASD student, can also be very useful in providing opportunities for social skill development. Cooperative learning tasks should be incorporated into daily classroom curriculum for most academic tasks, such as math drills, reading activities, art and science projects, etc. And as I stated before, video modeling has grown tremendously over the past decade as a means for teaching social skills. There are a lot of really great videos out there available for teaching a wide variety of social skills to individuals with high-functioning autism and Asperger's. Many of them are pretty good. And also, making your own videos using target students and other familiar people can also be very effective. You'll want both examples of inappropriate and appropriate responding in these videos to really teach the discrimination and recognition to your ASD students. Modeling and role-playing can be done in more isolated settings to train specific social and pragmatic language skills, but must quickly be brought into a natural setting. Now let's talk about the option of whole class social skills training. Social skills are an area that many typically developing students struggle with. So not just individuals on the spectrum, but all children, especially those going into the middle school years. It's therefore a good idea to include some kind of social skills curriculum in these classroom activities, with social skills lessons being taught on at least a weekly basis, if not daily. You want to make sure, if you're involved in these lessons, that you're doing some of the following. You want to make sure that you have motivation for all students to be involved, and those are some examples of some things that we all know work effectively for individuals in the classroom. You want to make sure to ingrain the skill by practicing immediately. You may give daily mini lessons and review periodically during open, opportune instructional times. And you always want to make sure you're recognizing and reinforcing students for displays of those appropriate behaviors or approximations of the target behavior as you're shaping on those skills. Here's an example of what's called a T-chart. So a T-chart is something that you can do with the whole class that involves picking a target for the week. The example I have here is attentive listening. And you have the students as a group operationalize the behavior in terms of what that behavior would sound like and what that behavior would look like. So a T-chart is used for laying out a specific social skill that's going to be taught, and then training the students to be able to operationalize and identify that target social skill, both by what it looks like and, of course, what it sounds like. In addition to whole class social skills groups, it may sometimes be best to provide social skills training in smaller groups. Like I said, I think it's really going to be dependent oftentimes on the situation for an individual student, the makeup of the class, the resources that are available to a student, or to a teacher rather, whether that student is in a supported setting with other special needs individuals, or if they're mainstreamed fully into a reg ed environment. But small group social skills instruction can involve anywhere from 2 to 8 students, where students can practice and get feedback. It often involves modeling and role-playing, allows practice of the targeted skills for any individual student, and allows them to get feedback on how they're doing. When you're setting up social skills groups, you may try to involve all the peers within a larger classroom by rotating the peers who participate in the group, or you may want to choose only certain peers that seem to show a greater interest in developing a relationship or greater compassion for others and are good models of the skills that you wish to teach. These peers can also be used successfully as peer mentors during classroom activities. The lunch groups work well in school environments and can be set up rather easily by teachers. In these groups, a lot of times we'll use topic cards that can be effective in generating discussions of interest and should always, of course, include known topics of interest for the individual with ASD to increase their motivation to engage in these social activities. This also allows for teaching of topic transitions and learning to watch and respond to nonverbal clues that others are not yet interested in your topic. You may also need to provide primary or condition reinforcers, as we talked about before, such as tokens or points to students initially to increase their motivation to engage at high levels of interaction necessary for developing new skills in these small group settings. So here's just some skills that are taught commonly in these groups. So related to perspective taking and conversation skills, building friendships, being able to solve problems, developing social competence, recognizing and controlling emotions, and being able to share experiences. And then there's some specific interaction skills that I've included within those component classifications of skills. So my final slide really is focusing on what the key is going to be in successfully training the social skills necessary for individuals with high-functioning autism and Asperger's to succeed in their school environment. And it basically is going to come down to intensity. With all of the different approaches and strategies that have been discussed, none of them are going to be effective without training being done at a proper intensity. We have to make sure that we're increasing opportunities for learning these relevant social skills, that we're planning and preparing for these opportunities, and we're making sure that these are not just happening haphazardly, but that as educators, as school support staff, as parents, as therapists, that we are working together to provide these opportunities in a structured way, in a planful and meaningful way. And this needs to be done across all settings and in all school environments. It should involve all school personnel that can be trained on how to capture these social opportunities with our ASD kids. It's really important that we involve everybody from the top administrator on down to every peer in the student's classroom when we're trying to really develop this kind of socially successful environment for our individuals. And all students should be provided with training. It's very important that even if you're not necessarily in a class with an individual on the spectrum, if you're in a school where you may be coming in contact with these individuals, you should have some knowledge of what their needs would be. And make sure that there's lots of reinforcement that exists, natural reinforcement that exists in our schools for supporting the development of these important social skills. And we want to make sure that the culture is being created from the top. The children that I've worked with that have been most successful have really been in educational environments where everybody from the top administrator on down to all the educators in the school environment were involved in supporting the social learning of the individuals with special needs in this school setting. So creating that culture from the top down is really, really important. I've included a slide here for the published social skills curriculum. This is just a few of the things that I pulled out that I thought would be useful and helpful information for you all in being able to guide you to further develop these programs to support the students that you're working with. So hopefully you can take some time to take a look at this and familiarize yourself. And I think that is all I have for now. So if we've got time, I think we're probably about out of time. So I don't think I'll be able to respond to your questions at this time. So if you want to go ahead and just email those to info@skillsglobal.com, I'd be more than happy to respond to those. Thank you so much for your participation and attendance of this webinar. Thank you.